This is a podcast from the Daughters to Online Radio Company. There are some terms and conditions regarding its use. Probably. We hope you enjoy it, and if you do, maybe you would enjoy other podcasts. Welcome to the Daughters to Online Radio Company.
Hello and welcome to the DORC podcast, the last podcast before the American elections. How are you lot holding up? I really don't know how Americans can put up with a campaign that lasts for 18 months and spends that much money. But hey, as all American corporations know, you have to speculate to accumulate. I'm not accusing companies of expecting something in return for their investments. For legal reasons, I cannot stress strongly enough that I am not suggesting that for a minute. Obviously I am, but for legal reasons I am not. More on the election later. We can say hello to some listeners this week, because we have the technology. But first, hello to everyone who's been affected by Hurricane Sally. Not just our American listeners, but to everyone affected by the storm. Our thoughts are with you, but not, it would seem, the US and UK's media, who focused solely on New York. Although now I am going to do a bit of that, but only because we have a few listeners on the East Coast in the New York area. So hello to you if you download this nonsense from Woodbridge Township, West Farms in the Bronx, or Baychester. Hope you weren't too badly affected. Just one thing before we get started on the podcast. Many people, a lot of them from the political right and religious types, accuse science of being as dogmatic as, well, religion. That's science as a singular, nebulous thing, clings to its beliefs in the face of new evidence like, well, religions. This argument also comes from believers in the paranormal and alternative medicine. Science doesn't change its mind even when it's shown evidence that it is wrong. They say, look, water has a memory. Now we, as sensible people, although it is slightly harder to take you lot as sensible people seriously as you are listening to this, know that this is demonstrably untrue, but do I still say it? I only bring this up because of an experiment carried out by Professor Chris French, head of the Anomalistic Psychology Research Unit at Goldsmiths, in conjunction with the Merseyside Skeptics and others. Professor French designed an experiment to test some of the claims made by psychics. 2 psychics came forward and agreed to be tested, which I think they deserve some credit for, as many of their colleagues shy away from this sort of thing. I'm not sure why. Anyway, all involved read through the experiment design and agreed to it, although some changes were suggested by those to be tested and were accepted. The important point is that everybody involved, psychic and skeptic, agreed on the experiment criteria. Needless to say, the psychics failed the challenge. This is because they are all frauds and charlatans, whether deliberate or not. I really don't care if they sincerely believe that they can do what they claim they can. They can't. Likelihood is they're cold reading their subjects. Frauds, the lot of them. Anyway, back to the story. May I remind you that everyone had agreed to the way that the test would be carried out, so no one could have anything to complain about should it not go their way. Again, both the scientists and those being tested. According to the BBC website, Patricia Putt, one of the mediums being tested, and shown to have no psychic powers at all in the experiment that she agreed would test her claims to have psychic powers, said that this experiment, quote, doesn't prove a thing, end quote. But you agreed to the test. When it was shown that the surface of our planet was really made up of massive plates, science, as the media likes to call it, said, oh yes, so it is. We can see that your data is correct. We have tested it, we have replicated it, we can find no flaws. We were wrong, you are right. When it was claimed that neutrinos can travel faster than the speed of light, science said, that seems unlikely, but let's see your data and your equipment, and we'll see if we can find any problems. We'll try and replicate what you've done. If we can, it will show us that we were wrong, and we accept this. Oh no, wait. Got a loose lead on your GPS. That's what the problem is there. Oh, so we have. Our experimental results were wrong. Our bad. This is exactly the opposite of what this non-psychic person has done. Science is ever evolving and will change its position when new evidence is shown to be correct. Religion and pseudoscience doesn't. It is belief in the face of evidence. If you want any more information on this, you can read the articles on BBC and Guardian websites. We will put links in the show notes, or listen to the Skeptics with a K podcast, as they've covered it really quite well, as it was them that did the experiment. I suppose we should get on with the podcast, and as I have mentioned, the US election is thankfully very soon. And we have faced some criticism from the GOP and their supporters for what they perceive as left-wing bias. But as they see left-wing bias in everything and everyone, but especially in the media, this doesn't really bother us. That and the fact we are based in England and don't have to comply with US broadcasting regulation. However, during the week we did put out a programme that profiled both of the candidates fairly. Perhaps we should play it out here. Hello and welcome to In Profile, a programme that takes a sideways look at people in the spotlight and only really exists for that pun just there. This week, with the US election just around the corner and a record number of people having already voted, we thought this would be the perfect time to have a look at both of the candidates. Willard Mittens Romney is the Republican candidate this time round, businessman, governor, Mormon. He was born on the 12th of March 1947, some 100 years after the forming of his opinions on women and gays, in the former city of Detroit, the former home of some really great music and some fine-looking but ultimately almost undrivable cars. Whereas once it was a proud place, it is now a wasteland, with only a few bright spots, all of which were saved by the other guy, much to the disgust of Mittens, who would have much rather let venture capitalists, like his own Bain Finance, asset strip the living shit out of the place, making pretty much everyone redundant but returning a large profit for a few, including him. His childhood was unremarkable because he was raised by Mormons, but there are a few highlights. At school he was captain of the girls' netball team, a position that angered Mittens' father to the point where he was heard to tut a little louder than usual. He was an average pupil who excelled at almost nothing except for one thing: snorkelling. There is a recurring phrase in many of his report cards from the time, quote, "He is without doubt the least charismatic child I have ever met. If it wasn't for the calling of the register, you would never know he was here." End quote. Following school and university, where he earned a Bachelor of Arts, the least Republican qualification of them all, and a Master's in Business Administration from Harvard, the most Republican qualification, Mitt decided, as a non-drinker of alcohol and coffee, non-smoker, and disliker of the physical pleasures, that France was the country for him to be a Mormon missionary. So, in 1966, as England football was reaching its one and only peak, Mittens, or Gant as the French call him, arrived in a country where he was guaranteed not to fit in. Whilst other Christian denominations send their missionaries on simpler tasks, such as converting cannibals to Jesus, Mitt tried to get some Frenchmen to stop drinking wine and smoking. You, begrudgingly I grant you, have to admire someone who tries to carry out this thankless task for 2.5 years. I assume it was the Mormon Church's idea of a joke, like sending the new person out to buy tartan paint. Upon his return to the States, he was a changed man. He had little interest in politics, a trait he keeps with him to this day, although his father did work for the much-disgraced President Nixon. Mitt himself was viewed suspiciously by Republicans because he had visited another country and could speak its language fluently. In 1970, he and his now wife Anne Romney, most of whom has been replaced, were blessed with their first child, a son they called Taggart, after the Scottish detective series of the same name that ran in the UK on ITV from 1983 to 2011. They had many other children. Mr. Romney worked for several companies, but his big break into Republican politics came when he made an awful lot of money running Bain Capital. This company started as a venture capital company, but they soon learned they could make significantly more money by focusing on leverage buyouts and hedge funds. The Winter Olympics of 2002 were apparently saved by Mittens and his understanding of warm hands. Up to 50% of the funding for this event came from the federal government, which was a record level of federal funding for the staging of the US Olympics. Much of this came as a direct result of Mitt's personal, aggressive lobbying of Congress and federal agencies. State law in Massachusetts requires that someone running for governor should have 7 years consecutive residency in the state. The preferred Republican candidate had filed his tax returns for 1999 and 2000 in Utah, but this was overlooked by the Massachusetts State Ballot Law Commission, and Mitt stood for governor in 2002. He ran as a political outsider despite being the GOP's chosen one. He described himself as a moderate with progressive views, and said on abortion that he would, quote, preserve and protect a woman's right to choose, end quote. After personally contributing 60% of his campaign funds, Romney won the race and decided, because he's just like you and me, not to take the salary that came with the job, and didn't miss it. Looking at Governor Romney and presidential candidate Romney, you may ask yourself which is the real one. Governor Romney closed corporate tax loopholes and was pro-choice. He increased a special gasoline retailer fee, helped increase state and local taxes, and in 2006 introduced Romney Care, which brought near universal health insurance to the state, the first state to do so. He also didn't support gay marriage and same-sex civil partnerships. Then he did, and then he didn't again. In 2008, he asked the GOP if he could run for president and started a campaign. They said no, and chose John McCain, the heir to the frozen chip fortune, instead. This policy failed, however, as John McCain turned out not to be the bloke from the Die Hard movies, and was beaten in the presidential race by the black dude, perhaps the biggest humiliation for this proudly racist party. Not discouraged, however, Mitt has now risen like a political zombie, and after fighting off what is generally considered to be the most cartoonishly ridiculous set of fellow Republican nomination seekers, all vying to be beaten by President Obama, the GOP finally, reluctantly, and because no one else came forward or could be found, chose him, Willard Mittens Romney, to try and win the job as most powerful man in the world. And, due to the ridiculous state of American politics and the rather restrictive two-party system, where you have to vote for one or other of them, he seems to be genuinely in with a shot. The world holds its collective breath and really hopes that it isn't him who wins, despite President Obama not keeping quite a few of his campaign promises, although most of that is down to a political system in America, where the House and Senate work as hard as they can to make sure nothing really changes that much, and a massive increase in the amount of unmanned drone attacks that result in the death of many more women and children than terrorists, unless you reclassify terrorists as anyone killed in a drone attack, which he has. We still all think that the world will be a better place if Obama wins. Mitt Romney has lovely, thick, lush American hair. And now, a word from our sponsor. New on EMI Classics, yet another attempt to dumb classical music down and make it popular with young people, even though it's actually doing pretty well on its own. The Classical Brit Awards have embarrassed the classical world by having Gary Barlow on. And yes, Marlene Klass can play a bit, but Lang Lang, she is not. El Divo and G4 have not lowered the bar enough yet, so we proudly bring you Holly Hums the Classics. From that tune off that advert. That one from that film. You know the one. We have them all covered. Holly hums the classics, the very sound of a classical barrel being scraped. Much of the information used in the Romney part of today's programme was taken from Wikipedia, considered by many on the right to be a liberal conspiracy, as is all of the media, including the stations and papers that are owned by prominent right-wingers and staffed by prominent right-wingers. In order to counteract any charges of bias against us, we have taken a lot of the information for the upcoming part on President Obama from Conservapedia and the recently launched Trumpopedia. Who knows where President Obama was born? He will not tell us, but it is likely he was born in Kenya, and therefore not eligible to be American president. It has nothing to do with his skin colour that people demand things from him that they never would of a white Republican. He was educated in the ways of Islam and communism whilst watching Sesame Street as a child. In recent weeks, serial self-publicist and buffoon Donald Trump issued a challenge to President Obama, saying he would donate $5 million to a charity of the president's choice if he, the president, would release his college records. This offer went uncommented on by the president, who presumably had something to hide, and it was nothing to do with him running the country and for re-election and helping to coordinate the mess left by Hurricane Sally, which, by the way, was caused by him using HARP in order to win the election. In 1666, there was a great fire in London, England, that is now called the Great Fire of London. A vast area of the city was destroyed in this fire. Following the destruction, it was decided that the fire spread so fast because of the denseness of the London slums, and also their use of the highly flammable material thatch on their roofing. A law was passed banning thatch buildings from the capital. Only recently has an exception been made, and that was for the new Globe Theatre, built in 1997. Donald Trump is still banned from London. In the UK there are many euphemisms for the releasing of flatus via the anus. Breaking wind is perhaps the most used, but another popular one is Trump. And for some reason that hath cultural commentators confused, the word Trump to refer to a fart is increasing exponentially. Many people consider Donald Trump, despite his vast wealth, to be a joke of a man. These people are correct. Upon taking office in 2009, President Obama was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for simply not being George W. Bush. It was seen by many not so much as an award for the man, but for the country. It was the world thanking them for not voting for yet another Republican. Republicans saw it as a left-wing conspiracy. This is similar to their views on cheese. On the economy, the president has performed terribly. He has reduced unemployment, although Fox News, amongst others, bravely stood up and said that these figures were a lie and faked by the independent board that calculates American unemployment figures to make the president look good. He has lifted the economy out of recession. The Dow Jones is up to levels higher than it was before the 2008 crash. That was on the glorious George W. Bush's watch, but absolutely nothing to do with him. The stimulus package introduced by this president in 2009 not only saved many jobs, and undoubtedly helped save the economy, and he cut the tax rate for 98% of US taxpayers to the lowest levels for 60 years. But what about the other 2%? Why won't this president cut taxes for the obscenely wealthy? Why should they pay their fair share like normal people, when these are not normal people? They are billionaires, and therefore different from us, and should be treated so. Yes, the president has overseen the killing of Osama bin Laden, but that was ages ago. What has he done recently to keep you safe? Has he been round to your house to personally check the batteries in your smoke or carbon monoxide alarm? No, No, he hasn't, and this is because he wants you to die. Horribly. He repealed the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law in the US Armed Services, allowing gay men and women to openly serve their country, and has come out in support of gay marriage. He has introduced some healthcare reforms, making it easier for many Americans to get health insurance for the first time, like the ones Romney introduced in Massachusetts, but now denies. So, he has lowered taxes, lifted the economy out of recession, killed the biggest terrorist threat to the US, made life a little nicer for gay Americans, and tried to make everyone a little healthier. But what has he done for billionaires? If you ignore the fact that most American billionaires are now richer than when he came to power, then nothing. And perhaps most importantly of all, he doesn't have as nice American hair as Mitt Romney does.
The Dorchester Online Radio Company is written by Martin Norris, produced by Martin Norris, and recorded in the front room of a house owned by Martin Norris. Please do feel free to give us a good review on iTunes, or Twitter and Facebook your friends to tell them about us. Thank you.